got a dead man walking here.
Your name is John Coffey.
Like to drink, only not spelled the same.
Kill him twice, you boys. You go on kill a raping baby killer twice.
Wipe your face before you stand up, Dean.
Yes, sir.
John Coffey, you have been condemned to die in the electric chair by a jury of your peers, sentence imposed by a judge in good standing in this state. Do you have anything to say before sentence is carried out?
I'm sorry for what I am. Please, Paul. Don't put that thing over my face. Don't put me in the dark. I was afraid of the dark.
Well, on to.
The tale opens with a heart-pounding scene where we see a group of men, their hands gripping rifles and shotguns, racing frantically through sprawling fields under a tense gray sky. But the story holds back on telling us why they're running or what they're chasing, leaving us gripped with curiosity and suspense. As the narrative pushes forward, we're introduced to an elderly man named Paul Edgecomb, who lives in a quiet nursing home, a place he's ended up in because he's all alone in the world. His beloved wife, Jan Edgecomb, has long since passed away, leaving him with nothing but memories. One ordinary day, we see Paul and the other elderly residents gathered in the nursing home's common room, their eyes fixed on an old black and white movie flickering on the television screen, a classic from decades past. And something about this film strikes Paul so deeply that tears begin streaming down his weathered face, overwhelming him with emotion until he can't bear it and abruptly walks out, leaving the others puzzled. His close friend, an elderly woman named Elaine Connolly, notices his distress and follows him, her concern evident as she gently asks him why he's crying so uncontrollably, what could possibly have stirred such pain. Paul hesitates, his heart heavy with a secret he's kept buried for years. But Elaine's persistent kindness finally breaks through, and he decides to confide in her, revealing a story he's never shared with anyone else, a story about a man named John Coffey from the year 1935. A story that changed his life forever. Paul begins to recount how back in 1935, he worked as the execution supervisor at Cold Mountain Penitentiary's death row, a grim place he and the other guards called
The last mile. We called ours the Green Mile.
because of the faded green linoleum floor that stretched down the corridor, leading straight to the electric chair where every prisoner faced their final moments. The story shifts into a vivid flashback to 1935, where we see a younger Paul Edgecomb, a man in his prime but suffering from a painful urinary infection that's growing worse with each passing day, the kind of pain that makes every step a struggle. His wife Jan keeps urging him to see a doctor, her voice filled with worry, but Paul, stubborn and hopeful it'll pass, brushes it off thinking he can tough it out, though his grimacing face betrays the agony he's enduring, the pain clearly not fading but intensifying. While Paul is in the bathroom, wincing through the discomfort, his fellow officer Brutus Howell, a tall, reliable man everyone calls brutal despite his kind nature, comes to him with news about a new prisoner being brought to the Green Mile by another officer, Percy Wetmore. Percy's an arrogant, cruel young man, always cursing at the prisoners, harassing them with a smirk, a truly bad apple who makes everyone's life harder. This new prisoner, John Coffey, is a towering figure, a giant of a man whose sheer size and strength make even Paul, a seasoned guard, feel a twinge of unease when he first lays eyes on him. But there's something unusual about John. Despite his intimidating presence, he seems gentle, almost childlike, perhaps mentally slow, his eyes carrying a quiet sadness. Percy, undaunted by John's size, keeps taunting him, treating him like garbage, but Paul, who can't stand Percy's behavior, sharply orders him to leave the cell block, his voice firm with authority. Another prisoner, already on the Green Mile, Edouard Delacroix, a wiry man with a heavy Cajun accent, finds Percy's antics hilarious and bursts out laughing, which sets Percy off like a firecracker. He grabs Del's hand in a rage and snaps his fingers, breaking them with a sickening crunch. Paul, though furious, doesn't punish Percy, only tells him to get out, and we're left wondering why he lets Percy slide, a reason that'll become clear later. Paul turns to the new prisoner and asks for his name, answers that his name is John Coffey, spelled like the drink, but not the same.
Like to drink, only not spelled the same.
promising he'll follow every rule and cause no trouble here, adding cryptically, "I couldn't help it, boss. It was too late."
Boss, I tried to take it back, but it was too late.
A statement that hangs in the air, mysterious and heavy, hinting at a deeper truth we'll uncover later, a twist that's central to the story. Paul, curious, later reads John's file and is shocked to his core to learn that John has been convicted of the brutal rape and murder of 2 young girls, daughters of a farmer we saw in that opening scene, running through the fields with weapons in hand, chasing something or someone. We revisit that moment in a flashback. A group of villagers, armed and angry, find John kneeling in the dirt, holding the lifeless bodies of the 2 girls, sobbing uncontrollably, repeating over and over that he couldn't stop it, that it was too late.
I couldn't help it. I tried to take it back, but it was too late.
To anyone watching, it seems clear John didn't commit the crime. His grief feels too raw, too genuine. But this is 1935 America, a time when racial divides ran deep, and as a black man, John was likely judged guilty without a second thought, condemned by prejudice as much as evidence. Paul, after speaking with John, whose gentle nature shines through every word, can't believe he could commit such a monstrous act, his gut telling him something doesn't add up. Meanwhile, Warden Howell Morse, a stern but fair man and Paul's good friend, shows up at the prison visibly upset because Percy, with his knack for stirring trouble, has complained about Paul to his aunt, who just so happens to be the governor's wife, giving Percy powerful connections. Howell pulls Paul aside and advises him to tolerate Percy for now, explaining that Percy wants to transfer to Briar Ridge, a mental hospital, but is sticking around the Green Mile because he's obsessed with seeing an execution up close, like some morbid thrill seeker. Howell warns Paul to keep his cool, to handle things calmly so both their jobs stay safe, because Percy's influence could make life difficult. During their conversation, Hal opens up about his wife, Melinda Morse, who's been suffering from crippling migraines that no medicine seems to help, and he's taking her for an X-ray soon, his voice trembling with fear that it could be something serious. Paul tries to reassure him, saying Melinda will be fine, but later that night, at home with Jan, Paul shares his worry about Melinda's condition, admitting that his own infection is getting so bad it's hard to bear. Jan, frustrated but loving, pushes him again to see a doctor, and Paul nods, promising he'll go, but we can tell he's not serious. The next morning, something strange happens on the Green Mile. A mouse appears, scampering across the floor, completely fearless, coming right up to the guards, which is unheard of for a creature that usually bolts at the sight of humans. Paul, amazed, tells the others, Brutus, Dean Stanton, and Harry Terwilligan, but they all agree they can't let a mouse run loose in a prison, so they tear apart a storeroom, tossing boxes and crates aside to catch it, only to find it's vanished without a trace. The next day, though, the mouse is back, bold as ever, darting around the Green Mile like it owns the place. Dean, who'd been told about this unusual mouse, tries offering it a bit of food, but Percy, who hates anything he can't control, loses it when he sees the mouse and chases it back to the storeroom, determined to kill it. Paul and Brutus walk in, finding Percy tearing the place apart, throwing things left and right, but Paul doesn't stop him, letting him waste his energy, knowing the mouse is too clever to be caught. Percy, red-faced and furious, starts threatening their jobs, boasting about his connections to the governor's wife. But Paul steps in, his voice calm but firm, warning Percy that if he threatens them again, they'll forget about his influence, and it won't end well for him, a warning that makes Percy back off, at least for now. Days later, it's time for the execution of a prisoner named Arlen Bitterbuck, a Native American man convicted of murder. The guards gather for a rehearsal, where they are carefully instructed that a wet sponge must be placed on the prisoner's head before the electric chair is turned on, ensuring the current flows directly and kills instantly. A dry sponge means a slow, torturous death, a mistake they must never make. Percy, standing among them, listens closely, taking in every detail. When Arlen's execution day arrives, it goes as planned, but afterward, Percy mocks Arlen's lifeless body, making cruel jokes, which infuriates Brutus, who believes that once a prisoner's punishment is over, their body deserves respect, as they are equal to anyone in death. Paul, fed up with Percy's cruelty, pulls him aside and asks why he doesn't just transfer to Briar Ridge, a comfortable job waiting for him. But Percy makes a deal. He'll leave the Green Mile, but only if Paul lets him lead the next execution, a role that usually handles Brutus, who's steady and experienced. Percy adds a threat. If Paul says no, he'll use his connections to stay on the Green Mile forever, making their lives miserable. Paul, trapped, reluctantly agrees. The next day, 2 significant things happen. First, Edouard Delacroix has somehow tamed the fearless mouse, naming it Mr. Jingles. And it's astonishing. Mr. Jingles follows Del's commands like a trained circus animal, fetching a spool and performing tricks, delighting Paul, Brutus, Dean, and Harry, who watch in amazement, though Percy, as always, glares with disgust, hating the mouse and everything it represents. Second, Hal Morse pulls Paul aside to warn him about a new prisoner arriving soon, William Wharton, known as Wild Bill or Billy the Kid, a notorious troublemaker who's unpredictable and dangerous, someone they'll need to handle with extreme caution. Hal seems distracted, his voice heavy, and he confides that Melinda's X-ray revealed a brain tumor, a devastating truth he hasn't yet told her, lacking the courage to break her heart. Paul, shaken by this news, lies awake that night, his mind racing, and his infection pain surges so intensely that he can barely stand it, the worst it's ever been. When Wild Bill arrives, he's a mess, high on drugs, barely able to stand or dress himself. So the guards help him into his prison clothes. But the moment they reach the Green Mile, Bill snaps, attacking everyone in a wild frenzy, grabbing Dean Stanton by the throat and trying to choke the life out of him. Percy stands frozen, too terrified to move, even as Paul shouts for him to act. Brutus, quick and strong, steps in, overpowering Bill and locking him in his cell, while Dean, gasping for air, is rushed to the hospital for treatment. Paul, already weakened by his infection, collapses from the pain, and John Coffey, watching from his cell, calls out to him, his voice urgent but calm.
Boss, I need to see you down here.
This is not a good time. John Coffey, not a good time at all.
But I need to see you, boss. I need to talk to you.
Del warns Paul to stay away, afraid of what John might do, but Paul, driven by instinct, stumbles toward John's cell. John grabs Paul's arm, and suddenly, the cell fills with a strange glowing light, like something otherworldly, as John heals Paul's infection, the pain vanishing completely, leaving Paul feeling as though he'd never been sick at all. John coughs out a cloud of ash. His face strained and collapses back in his cell. Paul, stunned, keeps this miracle to himself, not telling the other guards, but he confides in Jan later, unable to hold it in. To learn more about John, Paul meets with his lawyer, who says John's gentle, almost childlike behavior makes it hard to believe he could commit such a horrific crime. But the evidence is damning. John was found holding the dead girls, crying, perhaps out of guilt or remorse. The lawyer insists Paul shouldn't doubt John's guilt, but Paul, unconvinced, feels there's more to the story. Jan, grateful for Paul's recovery, bakes sweetbread and sends it to John as a thank you. One day, Paul tells Del that some important people, VIPs, want to see Mr. Jingles perform his tricks, a lie they use to get Del out of his cell for an execution rehearsal without causing him panic, as they do with all prisoners before their time comes. Percy, to everyone's surprise, leads the rehearsal and he's flawless, following every step perfectly. When Dean returns from the hospital, Percy, standing near Bill's cell, starts taunting Del again, mocking him cruelly. But Bill suddenly grabs Percy through the bars, scaring him so badly that Percy wets his pants in front of everyone. Del, seeing this, laughs hysterically, which humiliates Percy further, planting a seed of deep hatred in him toward Del. Later, Paul and Brutus sit down with Del and break the news that his execution is approaching. But to ease his fears, they tell him they found a place for Mr. Jingles called Mouseville, a made-up circus in Florida, where the mouse can live happily after Del's gone. Del, overjoyed, believes every word, thrilled that his beloved Mr. Jingles will have a good home. In his excitement, Del tosses Mr. Jingles' spool toy, which rolls outside his cell, and as the mouse scampers after it, Percy, who's been waiting for a chance to lash out, stomps on Mr. Jingles, crushing it under his boot. Del breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably, his heart shattered, and Paul and Brutus are furious, their blood boiling at Percy's cruelty, but they're powerless because of Percy's powerful connections. John, watching quietly, asks Paul to give him the mouse, and Paul, trusting John after the healing, hands over Mr. Jingles' broken body without hesitation, despite the other guards' confusion and skepticism. What happens next is nothing short of a miracle. John holds the mouse, and a soft glow surrounds his hands as Mr. Jingles comes back to life, scampering as though nothing happened, leaving everyone stunned, their jaws dropped at what they've just witnessed. The guards, seizing the moment, tease Percy, saying he's so incompetent he can't even kill a mouse. And Percy, furious, checks and sees Mr. Jingles alive, convinced they swapped the mouse, but unable to prove it, which only makes him angrier. He threatens their jobs again, but Paul and Brutus flip the script. telling Percy he will lead Dell's execution, but if he doesn't transfer to Briarwidge afterward, Paul will write a report detailing how Percy froze in fear when Wild Bill attacked Dean, a failure that could ruin him, connections or not. Percy, cornered, agrees to the deal. When Dell's execution day arrives, he's brought to the electric chair where he tearfully apologizes for his crimes and reminds Paul about Mouseville, clinging to the hope that Mr. Jingles will be safe. Percy, in a cruel twist, tells Dell that Mouseville isn't real, just a story they made up to keep him calm, and this betrayal angers the guards, who can't act because the public is watching in the execution room. Percy, tasked with wetting the sponge, pretends to do it, but driven by his hatred for Dell, he deliberately leaves it dry, setting the stage for a horrific outcome. As the electric chair is switched on, Paul glances at the water bucket and sees it hasn't been disturbed, realizing too late that Percy used a dry sponge. But before he can stop it, the machine hums to life. Without a wet sponge, the current doesn't flow cleanly and Dell's body begins to burn slowly, his screams filling the air as a sickening smell spreads through the room, a gruesome, agonizing death. Hal, horrified, orders the machine stopped, but Paul, his voice grim, says Dell is still alive, so they let it continue until Dell finally dies, his body charred and broken. Percy, smug, claims he didn't know the sponge had to be wet, but Brutus, unable to contain his rage, punches him, knowing full well Percy did it on purpose to make Dell suffer. Paul, though furious, defends Percy just enough to ensure he'll transfer out, avoiding further trouble. Days later, Paul and Jan visit Hal's house, where they see Melinda, her condition dire, her face pale and drawn from the tumor's toll. Paul, struck by an idea, gathers Brutus, Dean, and Harry at his home, where they're enjoying a meal, and proposes a daring plan. They can save Melinda by sneaking John Coffey out of the prison to heal her, just as he healed Paul's infection and brought Mr. Jingles back to life. It's a huge risk. If they're caught, they could lose their jobs or even go to jail. But they've seen John's miracles and they trust Paul. So, they agree to the plan. To pull it off, they first deal with Wild Bill, who's a loose cannon. They pretend to drink in front of him, knowing he'll want some. And when he asks for a drink, Paul agrees, but slips sleeping pills into Bill's glass, knocking him out cold. Next, they handle Percy, overpowering him and tying him up, locking him in the storeroom to keep him out of the way. As they sneak John out of his cell, Bill, groggy but stirring, grabs John's arm, and John, his face darkening, mutters that Bill is a bad person, as if he's seen something terrible in him, but he shakes it off and follows the guards. They slip out of the prison without being seen and drive to Hal's house, but when they arrive, Hal hears the car and comes out with a shotgun, aiming it at John, his nerves frayed at the sight of a prisoner in the middle of the night. Paul frantically begs Hal to lower the gun, explaining they're there to help, and when Melinda's pained cries echo from inside, Hal softens, lowering his weapon. John, calm and unafraid, walks past Hal, saying he's there to help, and enters the house, where Melinda lies in bed, her condition so bad she can barely speak. John speaks to her gently, politely, and then, in a moment of pure wonder, he places his hands on her, and a glowing light fills the room as he pulls the tumor out of her body, absorbing it into himself, coughing out a cloud of ash as he stumbles back. Hal, watching in disbelief, sees Melinda sit up, her face restored, her health miraculously returned, and she thanks John, giving him a St. Christopher locket as a token of her gratitude. John, barely able to stand, is rushed back to the Green Mile by the guards, who lock him in his cell before heading to free Percy from the storeroom. They warn Percy not to say a word about this, threatening to make his life hell if he talks. But before they can finish, John reaches through the bars, grabs Percy, and blows the tumors ashed into him, transferring the sickness. Percy, in a trance-like state, walks straight to Bill's cell and shoots him dead, collapsing afterward. John explains to Paul that he did it on purpose. When Bill grabbed him earlier, John's powers gave him a vision, revealing that Bill, a deranged psychopath, was the one who raped and murdered the farmer's daughters, not John, who had arrived too late to save them, his tears in that field born of helpless grief. John couldn't revive the girls, as they were too far gone, unlike Mr. Jingles, who was only briefly dead. Paul, learning John's innocence, is heartbroken, his faith in justice shaken. The police arrive, taking Bill's body away and carting Percy, now mentally broken from the tumor's effects.
So Percy sent to Briarwidge not as an officer, but as a patient, a twist of his deeds for his cruelty. Paul, desperate to right a wrong, plans to free John, but John, exhausted by the world's pain and suffering, refuses, saying he's tired and wants peace, not freedom. The guards, respecting his wish, don't force him to escape, but John has one final request: to watch a movie. A simple wish they grant, letting him enjoy a film in the prison's projection room. When John's execution day comes, the guards, Paul, Brutus, Dean, and Harry, are overcome with grief, knowing John is a pure, almost saintly man, but they hide their tears, doing their duty as he's led to the electric chair. Back in the present, elderly Paul finishes telling this story to Elaine, who listens wide-eyed but struggles to believe it, thinking it sounds like something out of a novel. a fictional tale too incredible to be true. To convince her, Paul takes her to a small cabin in the woods where he shows her Mr. Jingles, now an old mouse, frail and gray but still alive, playing weakly with the same spool toy Dell used decades ago. Elaine, seeing the toy and the mouse's familiar tricks, is stunned, finally believing Paul's story. Paul explains that when John held Mr. Jingles during Dell's execution, feeling his pain, and later showed Paul the vision of Bill's crime, some of John's miraculous power, a gift of unnaturally long life, transferred to them unintentionally, not on purpose but by accident. Paul reveals he's 108 years old, though he looks far younger, his body preserved by John's touch. But this gift feels like a curse. He's outlived Jan, his friends, everyone he loved, and soon he knows Elaine will pass too. Sure enough, sometime later, Elaine dies, and Paul, now used to loss, carries on, living with the weight of his long life, a man forever tied to the Green Mile and the miracles and tragedies he witnessed there, as the story comes to a quiet, poignant close.